The story of global politics in the 21st century is often told through the familiar voices of Western media, Western think tanks, and Western influencers. But every now and then, a countercurrent emerges, a voice that challenges the comfortable narrative and exposes truths that have been deliberately buried beneath layers of selective storytelling. When Ibrahim Traoré, Africa's youngest head of state, turned his attention toward the rising influence of Charlie Kirk and the narratives surrounding his brand of politics, what followed was more than just a commentary. It was a revelation, a dissection of silence, and an unveiling of aspects that were too inconvenient for mainstream conversations. The narrative of Charlie Kirk, an American political commentator who built his career on shaping conservative youth movements, is one that many in the United States consider straightforward. A young, ambitious figure rising to prominence as the founder of Turning Point USA, celebrated for rallying a generation to embrace conservative ideals. His supporters champion him as a fearless defender of traditional values. His detractors criticize him as a populist provocateur. But Traoré's analysis took a different angle altogether, not confined by America's partisan battles, but instead examining the global implications, the hidden alignments, and the structural silences that surround Kirk's story. What Traoré underscored was not Kirk's public persona, nor his highly visible clashes with American liberals, but the deliberate absence of discussion about who benefits from Kirk's rise, who funds the machinery that carries his voice, and how those networks stretch far beyond the borders of the United States. By bringing Africa into the conversation, Traoré exposed the invisible threads connecting narratives of nationalism in the West to the systems that perpetuate exploitation in the global South. In his speeches, he argued that Kirk's story, while framed as one of grassroots energy and youthful rebellion, was in fact backed by financial and political scaffolding designed to maintain a global hierarchy. The part that had been kept silent, according to Traoré, was that the machinery behind Kirk's rise is not about the empowerment of ordinary people, but about ensuring that power remains consolidated among elites, both American and global. The organizations that fund, nurture, and amplify voices like Kirk's are often the same ones whose policies devastate Africa's economic stability, whose corporations exploit natural resources, and whose institutions create dependency traps through debt and conditional aid. By ignoring these realities, the media allows Kirk's image to float unchallenged as a story of merit and charisma, when in fact it is part of a much deeper system of influence. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's audience listened closely because they understood the mechanics of foreign influence all too well. For decades, Africa has been presented with stories of benevolent Western engagement, yet those narratives have masked systems of control. By placing Kirk within that broader frame, Traoré invited the world to recognize that the silence surrounding these connections was intentional. To expose it is not to attack Kirk as an individual, but to dismantle the illusion that such figures emerge independent of the global structures that serve them. Traoré further argued that the silence around Kirk's story is dangerous because it creates a false sense of independence within the narrative. Youth who rally to Kirk's message are told that they are rebelling against the establishment, when in reality their rebellion has been carefully curated, their anger redirected away from global financial elites and toward targets that pose no threat to entrenched power. This is not unlike what has been attempted in Africa, where youth have often been manipulated into blaming their neighbors, their governments, or their cultures for problems that originate in exploitative global systems. The Burkina leader insisted that Africa must learn from this silence. For too long, Africa's stories have also been told selectively, with the parts that expose Western complicity deliberately excluded. Stories of poverty are highlighted, but stories of extraction are muted. Stories of corruption are broadcast, but stories of destabilization funded from abroad are silenced. By dissecting Kirk's narrative, Traoré was really issuing a broader warning. Beware of the power of selective storytelling, for it is one of the most effective tools of domination. As he continued, Traoré linked Kirk's trajectory with the broader rise of populist figures worldwide, from Europe to Latin America, and showed how these movements often serve as pressure valves rather than revolutions. They channel discontent into manageable outlets, providing the illusion of rebellion while ensuring that the deeper structures of global inequality remain untouched. What the media keeps silent, he said, is the shared architecture behind these stories, a web of financial interests, ideological think tanks, and geopolitical strategies that extend their reach far beyond the borders in which they appear. The silence, according to Traoré, is not accidental, it is designed. Just as Kirk's story omits the hand of benefactors, Africa's struggles are often told without reference to the role of global powers. And just as Kirk's supporters are mobilized to defend sovereignty against supposed domestic enemies, African nations are pressured to surrender sovereignty under the guise of partnership. By drawing this parallel, Traoré revealed that the silence is itself the message. What is not said is as important as what is spoken. His words resonated because they came at a time when Africans are demanding to reclaim their narratives. To hear a leader dissect the machinery of silence in another continent's politics gave them a mirror through which to view their own. The exposure of Kirk's hidden scaffolding was less about the man himself and more about the global playbook that sustains inequality. In the end, Traoré's intervention did not just reveal a hidden part of Charlie Kirk's story. It revealed the method by which global powers construct all stories. By uncovering what was kept silent, he forced his audience to question every narrative presented to them, from the glorification of Western influencers to the demonization of African leaders. The real lesson, he argued, was not simply about Kirk, but about the discipline of listening carefully to what is not said, for in that silence lies the architecture of power. And as the hall filled with the weight of his words, it became clear that this was not merely a critique of one individual, but a challenge to the entire system of storytelling that defines who is celebrated, who is silenced, and who is left in the shadows of history.